Today, I want to talk to you about something that is both biologically powerful and spiritually essential: the ability to focus on yourself and to stay silent in a world that demands your constant reaction. Neuroscience teaches us that where your attention goes, your brain follows. Every time you focus outward on drama, noise, or negativity, you're wiring your brain for distraction. But when you focus inward, in silence, you activate the systems responsible for growth, clarity, and long-term success. Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Focusing on yourself isn't selfish, it's self-preservation. This isn't just theory, it's science, it's discipline, and it's the key to building a strong, stable, and unshakable mind in a chaotic world. Silence is often misunderstood. In a culture that rewards noise, visibility, and constant communication, choosing to stay silent can seem counterintuitive or even weak. But from a neurological standpoint, silence is not the absence of activity, it is the foundation of deep mental processing. When we choose silence intentionally, we activate parts of the brain responsible for self-awareness, emotional regulation, and high-level decision-making. The human brain is constantly scanning for information. In noisy environments, whether that's literal noise or the metaphorical noise of social media, conversations, and emotional conflict, the brain is forced into a reactive state. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, long-term planning, and self-control, becomes overwhelmed. In contrast, silence creates space. It gives the nervous system a break from overstimulation, allowing your mind to reset and recalibrate. Neuroscientific research has shown that even 2 minutes of complete silence can be more relaxing for the brain than listening to music. Silence activates the default mode network, DEAM, a system in the brain that kicks in during restful introspection. This network is associated with self-reflection, memory consolidation, and problem-solving. In other words, when you are silent, your brain gets the opportunity to do its most meaningful work, integrating experiences and planning your next moves. From a psychological perspective, silence also builds emotional resilience. When we stay quiet, especially in moments of confrontation or challenge, we activate our ability to regulate emotions. Instead of reacting impulsively, something driven by the amygdala, the brain's fear and emotion center, we allow the prefrontal cortex to lead. This shift allows us to respond rather than react, creating more powerful outcomes both in relationships and in our internal lives. Silence also improves sensory acuity. When external noise is removed, the brain becomes more attuned to subtle internal signals like gut instincts, emotional cues, or unresolved thoughts. This heightened internal awareness can help you make clearer decisions and understand yourself on a deeper level. Many people underestimate how much mental clutter is caused by constant external input. When we remove that input, the brain doesn't go blank, it becomes more precise. In addition, silence cultivates discipline. Choosing not to speak when you could is a form of cognitive control. It teaches the mind that not every impulse needs to be acted upon. This builds what scientists refer to as top-down control, where the brain's higher functions override more primitive emotional responses. In daily life, this means fewer regrets, stronger boundaries, and a much deeper sense of personal power. From a performance standpoint, athletes, leaders, and creatives often seek silence intentionally. It's where they recalibrate. Silence creates an internal environment that enhances focus, memory, and adaptability. It slows the pace of the world and speeds up mental clarity. This is not about zoning out, it's about tuning in deeply and deliberately. When silence becomes a part of your routine, it starts to change your identity. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself to everyone. You stop wasting energy on opinions that don't matter. You begin to operate from a place of calm certainty, which makes your presence more powerful and your decisions more strategic. Silence, therefore, is not passive. It's active, intelligent, and intentional. It trains the brain to listen before it speaks, to think before it reacts, and to lead from a place of depth rather than ego. It may not feel natural at first, especially if you're used to being constantly connected. But with practice, silence becomes one of the strongest tools in your mental arsenal. It creates the space where your true thoughts can emerge and where your long-term goals can finally take shape without interference. Your focus is not just a mental concept, it is a biological process that shapes the very structure and function of your brain. The human brain is incredibly adaptive, and one of its most powerful traits is neuroplasticity, the ability to rewire itself based on what you repeatedly do and think about. Where you direct your attention consistently is where your brain invests its energy. That's why focus is not just about productivity, it's about identity and transformation. Every time you choose to concentrate on something, neurons in your brain fire in specific patterns. The more often those patterns are activated, the stronger those neural connections become. This is the principle behind the phrase neurons that fire together wire together. In simple terms, what you focus on becomes easier to focus on in the future. Your brain starts to filter your reality through that lens. If you constantly focus on distractions, drama, or negativity, your brain will become optimized for those things. But if you train your focus on personal growth, discipline, and long-term goals, your brain will evolve to support that kind of mindset. Modern neuroscience shows that attention is one of the most energy-intensive activities the brain can engage in. Just like physical exertion tires out your muscles, prolonged focus tires your brain. That's why mental fatigue is real, but it also means your attention is a finite, powerful resource. If you spend your focus on things that don't matter, on comparing yourself to others, engaging in arguments, or scrolling endlessly, you're spending your most valuable cognitive currency on things that don't give you a return. On the other hand, focused attention on yourself, on your thoughts, habits, and goals yields exponential returns in the form of clarity, confidence, and momentum. Attention is also the gateway to perception. What you focus on determines what you notice. The brain has a system called the reticular activating system, RAS, which filters incoming information based on what you've told it is important. This is why, after setting a goal or thinking about a specific subject, you start to notice opportunities or patterns related to that goal more frequently. It's not that those things weren't there before, it's that your focus shifted, and so your brain started bringing different information to your conscious awareness. When you focus on yourself truly and consistently, you start to notice what you need to change, what you need to let go of, and what you need to build. You begin to filter out noise and distractions that once felt important but were actually just mental clutter. Over time, this focused inward attention becomes self-mastery. You stop chasing things that are external markers of success and instead begin to align your actions with your internal standards and long-term vision. There's also a physiological feedback loop at play. When you focus intently on a meaningful task, your brain releases neurochemicals like dopamine and acetylcholine. These chemicals not only make you feel good, they also reinforce the learning and memory circuits involved in whatever you're focusing on. In other words, focus doesn't just build the brain, it also rewards the brain, which then encourages you to continue focusing. This is how people build strong habits, deep skills, and high levels of self-discipline. The ability to focus is trainable, just like a muscle. And just like physical training, it requires effort, intention, and repetition. The more you practice concentrating on what truly matters to you, the easier it becomes to resist distractions and stay centered. Your brain starts to adapt to this new way of operating. It becomes more efficient, more resilient, and more aligned with your goals. Over time, what once required discipline becomes automatic. Your identity shifts from someone who's easily pulled in 100 directions to someone who lives and works with purpose. Attention is one of the most valuable and limited resources we possess. The human brain is constantly filtering, selecting, and prioritizing what to focus on from an overwhelming flood of information. Every second, your senses take in millions of data points, but only a tiny fraction of that ever reaches your conscious awareness. This filtration is not random, it's based on what your brain perceives as important. And what it perceives as important is directly influenced by what you choose to focus on repeatedly. That's why protecting your attention is not optional if you want to grow, it's essential. In a world filled with noise, distractions are everywhere. Notifications, headlines, opinions, and even your own overthinking all compete for your attention. But the brain can only deeply focus on one thing at a time. When you try to divide your focus, especially over long periods, you actually reduce your cognitive performance. You become less efficient, more reactive, and more prone to errors. Scientific studies have shown that multitasking decreases productivity, increases stress, and damages long-term memory consolidation. What feels like productivity is often just the illusion of movement without real progress. When you allow external factors to dictate your attention, you hand over control of your mental state. Attention is the gatekeeper of your reality. It determines not just what you see, but how you interpret and respond to it. If your attention is scattered, your thoughts are scattered. If your attention is focused on problems, your emotional state will reflect that. But if your attention is intentionally directed toward growth, healing, or self-development, your internal experience shifts accordingly. You become calmer, clearer, and more grounded, not because life got easier, but because your mental energy is no longer being drained by everything that doesn't serve you. Neuroscience shows that the act of focusing is energy intensive. The prefrontal cortex, which handles complex thinking, planning, and decision-making, consumes a disproportionate amount of the brain's energy supply. That means every moment you spend in distraction costs you mental fuel. And when your energy is wasted on trivial things, there's less left for important work like self-reflection, goal setting, learning, and disciplined action. This is why some people feel exhausted despite doing nothing meaningful all day. It's not the lack of rest, it's the cost of mismanaged attention. The challenge is that attention is not just pulled by the external world, it's also hijacked by internal habits. Thought patterns like worry, comparison, regret, and self-criticism can trap your attention and keep you stuck in loops that lead nowhere. These habits are reinforced over time through repetition. The more you focus on them, the stronger the neural circuits become. And the more energy they consume, the less energy you have for self-improvement. Breaking these patterns starts by becoming aware of where your attention naturally goes and then choosing to redirect it moment by moment towards something better. Intentional focus also builds psychological stability. When you train yourself to hold your attention on one thing at a time, you increase your capacity for patience, discipline, and presence. These are not just personality traits, they are mental skills that can be developed through practice. Over time, focused individuals become more resilient to external pressure, less influenced by temporary emotions, and more rooted in long-term thinking. This is one of the foundations of emotional intelligence, the ability to notice when your attention is being hijacked and consciously bring it back to what matters most. Protecting your attention also means setting boundaries. That includes physical boundaries like limiting your screen time and managing your environment, as well as emotional boundaries, such as saying no to conversations or people that drain your energy. It means creating mental space so your mind has the capacity to think clearly, make decisions, and stay aligned with your purpose. Every time you say no to a distraction, you are saying yes to clarity. Every time you choose where to focus, you are shaping who you become. Silence is not just the absence of noise, it is a state of mental clarity that allows the brain to process, repair, and recalibrate. In a world where people constantly feel the need to speak, react, and respond, silence becomes a rare and powerful tool. From a neuroscience perspective, silence enhances brain function. During periods of silence, especially when we are awake but not engaged in external stimuli, the brain enters a state of introspection, activating what scientists call the default mode network. This network is responsible for self-reflection, memory consolidation, and deep thinking. It's where we make sense of our experiences and emotions. When you deliberately stay silent, especially in moments of conflict or tension, you engage a higher level of cognitive control. Reactivity is tied to the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system. But choosing silence requires activating the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thought and impulse control. This shift not only gives you space to think before responding, but it also weakens the emotional trigger over time. Every time you pause instead of react, your brain learns to delay gratification and prioritize long-term outcomes over short-term emotional release. That is a sign of emotional maturity and mental strength. Staying silent also changes how people perceive you. From a psychological standpoint, people tend to fill silence with their own interpretations. If you remain quiet in a conversation, especially when others expect a reaction, it creates a kind of tension that commands respect. It signals that you are not easily provoked, not desperate for validation, and not controlled by emotion. This can shift the power dynamics in any interaction. Silence builds presence. It teaches others that you are selective with your words, that your energy is not easily accessed, and that your mind is focused on what truly matters. Silence allows for observation. When you are not constantly talking or explaining yourself, you become more aware of your surroundings. You notice what others are really saying, not just with their words, but with their tone, body language, and patterns. You begin to see motives, inconsistencies, and truths that are missed in the noise of reaction. This awareness gives you a psychological edge. You respond with precision if you choose to respond at all. You learn that silence is not weakness, it is strategy. Neurochemical responses in the body also shift during silence. When the brain is not bombarded with constant noise or stimulation, stress hormone levels begin to drop. Cortisol decreases, while brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BNF, which supports cognitive function and neural growth, increases. Regular moments of silence have been linked to reduced anxiety, improved memory, and better decision-making. In this way, silence becomes a form of mental training, one that enhances focus, awareness, and emotional regulation. Choosing silence is not about avoidance or suppression. It's about making space for insight, space for clarity, and space for intentional action. In silence, you become more attuned to your internal voice, which often gets drowned out by external chatter. You begin to understand what you truly think, feel, and value, not what others are projecting onto you. This inner knowing becomes your compass. The more you practice silence, the more connected you become to your own path. You stop living in reaction to the world and start creating from a place of depth and understanding. There is a discipline in silence that sharpens the mind. It strengthens your ability to observe without judgment, to listen without interruption, and to act without impulse. It cultivates humility because you learn that not every thought needs to be spoken, and not every situation needs your commentary. It cultivates self-respect because you recognize that your energy is precious and your peace is worth protecting. You realize that silence is not about being passive, it is about being deliberate. And in that deliberateness, you find power. The mind is constantly shaped by what it consumes. Just as the body reflects the quality of food it receives, the mind reflects the information, conversations, and environments it is regularly exposed to. Every thought, belief, and emotional response is influenced by what you repeatedly allow into your mental space. This is why selective exposure is critical. You cannot expect mental clarity, emotional strength, or inner peace if your mind is constantly flooded with negativity, comparison, gossip, or meaningless content. What you feed your mind either builds your discipline or weakens it, either reinforces your focus or fragments it. Your brain's neuroplasticity ensures that whatever you repeatedly focus on, you strengthen. That means if your attention is regularly directed toward content that stirs fear, anger, or self-doubt, those emotional circuits become more easily triggered. The brain learns patterns based on repetition. The more often you think a certain type of thought, the easier it becomes to think it again. Over time, those patterns hardwire into your identity. This is why mental input must be intentional. Protecting your mental environment is not just about avoiding the negative, it's about deliberately choosing the positive, the uplifting, the challenging, and the wise. The people you spend time with are a major part of this equation. Neuroscience shows that the human brain has mirror neurons, which cause us to subconsciously mimic the attitudes, emotions, and behaviors of those around us. If you consistently surround yourself with people who are unfocused, undisciplined, or emotionally reactive, those qualities begin to seep into your mind. Not because you consciously choose them, but because your brain naturally adapts to its environment. Conversely, when you place yourself in environments where discipline, growth, and clarity are valued, your mind rises to meet that standard. You start to think and act differently because you are being shaped by a different energy. What you listen to matters, what you read matters, what you scroll through on your phone matters. It all enters your subconscious and quietly influences your worldview. If the majority of your time is spent consuming trivial or toxic content, you can't be surprised when your thinking feels shallow or your emotions feel unstable. You cannot maintain a sharp, focused, and healthy mind while feeding it low-quality input. The mind becomes what it meditates on. What you allow in becomes what you operate from. If your goal is to evolve, then your inputs must match that vision. Every piece of content should be filtered through the lens of, does this support the person I am becoming? Your internal dialogue is also influenced by your mental diet. The way you speak to yourself is often a reflection of the voices and influences you absorbed. If you're around people who are negative, critical, or fearful, your self-talk will often mirror that tone. But if you're consuming material that is insightful, uplifting, and empowering, your internal voice becomes more constructive. Your mind becomes an ally instead of an enemy. That shift is subtle at first, but over time it transforms your daily experience, how you handle setbacks, how you plan your goals, how you treat yourself in silence. The mind craves order. It performs best when it is given clarity, purpose, and consistency. But when it's overwhelmed by chaotic input, it becomes reactive, scattered, and stressed. Mental clutter leads to mental fatigue, and mental fatigue makes discipline harder. This is why simplifying your mental diet, reducing unnecessary input, turning down the volume of the world, and curating your environment is so powerful. It allows your brain to conserve energy, focus better, and recover more effectively. A clean mind is not just more peaceful, it's more productive. It's sharper, faster, and more capable of adapting under pressure. The most successful and disciplined individuals are not those with the most talent, they are those who consistently guard their mind. They don't allow just anything to take up space in their thoughts. They know that clarity is not something you wait for, it's something you create. And that creation starts with input. What you feed your mind today will shape the strength of your thoughts tomorrow. That means choosing content and conversations that fuel your focus, deepen your wisdom, and align with your long-term vision. Silence doesn't only mean refraining from speaking. It represents a deeper state of control over your actions, thoughts, and emotional responses. In a world that constantly pushes us to speak louder, react faster, and be constantly engaged, silence is not just a choice, it is a form of strength. When you choose silence, you are asserting your authority over your own state of mind and protecting your mental energy from being drained by external forces. Every word spoken, every response given, carries energy. When you respond to every situation or individual, you are giving away parts of your inner peace. By choosing silence, you retain control over your emotional state, giving yourself the space to process, evaluate, and act deliberately. One of the most powerful aspects of silence is the ability to observe. When you aren't constantly speaking or reacting, you create a mental space where you can become a keen observer of both your environment and your inner workings. You begin to notice the subtleties in other people's words and actions, their true intentions, their underlying emotions, and the unspoken messages they communicate. In silence, you become more perceptive and better able to discern the truth of a situation. You learn to read between the lines, noticing things that might have otherwise been overlooked in the rush of conversation. This heightened awareness is invaluable not only in social situations but in all areas of life. By choosing silence, you also give yourself the opportunity to reflect. Reflection is the foundation of growth, and it requires quiet time to process experiences, understand emotions, and make sense of events. In silence, you can step outside of the constant stream of noise and distraction to evaluate your thoughts, behaviors, and choices. This reflection helps you refine your approach to life, make more informed decisions, and avoid the pitfalls of impulsive reactions. When you speak less, you listen more not just to others, but to yourself. You begin to understand your own desires, fears, and motivations with greater clarity. This self-awareness is essential for personal development and emotional intelligence. Another critical benefit of silence is emotional regulation. In the heat of an argument or stressful situation, your first instinct may be to react, to defend yourself, or to escalate the conflict. But in those moments, choosing silence is often the most powerful action you can take. Silence allows you to break the cycle of emotional reactivity, preventing words or actions that you might later regret. It gives you the time you need to calm down, to reflect on the situation, and to respond in a way that aligns with your values. This ability to control your emotional reactions is a hallmark of emotional maturity and resilience. By embracing silence, you learn how to create space between stimulus and response, giving yourself the opportunity to choose your actions wisely. Silence also serves as a shield from unnecessary negativity. Whether it's the noise of social media, the constant chatter of those around you, or the intrusive thoughts that cloud your mind, silence acts as a protective barrier. It helps you create boundaries between yourself and the noise that doesn't serve your mental well-being. In silence, you can disconnect from the distractions of the world, refocus on your goals, and recalibrate your mind to a state of calm and clarity. This practice of retreating into silence, even for short periods, helps to preserve your emotional and mental energy. It is a necessary tool for maintaining focus and peace in an often overwhelming and fast-paced world. When you learn the power of silence, you also discover the power of self-control. You begin to realize that your peace is not something that is dependent on external circumstances. Rather, it is something you create and protect through the choices you make. Choosing silence is an act of empowerment because it allows you to maintain your calm and poise, even in the most challenging situations. You no longer feel the need to respond to every comment or engage in every debate. You understand that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. In that silence, you gain the strength to remain grounded regardless of what's happening around you. Silence is an act of prioritization. By speaking less, you make room for what truly matters: your thoughts, your growth, your peace, and your purpose. The world may be loud, but in your silence, you find your center. Silence allows you to reconnect with yourself and to focus on what is truly important. It teaches you that the greatest strength lies not in reacting to everything around you, but in mastering the art of stillness, reflection, and thoughtful action.